and just giving yourself grace over it. So what I've learned with my kids is, I'm sure you've learned this too, they don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be told what to do as adults either. So, just reinforcing those positive things that they're doing, I think goes a really long distance. And then they're more apt to come to us and say, I've got this problem. What do you think about this?
You're listening to the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, just the thing we all said we needed when we first became parents. Remember that feeling? Where's the handbook for this? And I have to say, as a mom of teenagers, I am feeling that toddler, newborn feeling again. Where is the handbook for the teenage years? I'm your host, Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food. And on the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, I bring together experts in the fields of health, nutrition, parenting, psychology, and more to help you parents who truly desire to raise healthy, independent kids get the information you need. Parenting is truly the toughest and the most rewarding job in the world. So thank you for joining me to consult this Healthy Parenting Handbook, your guide to raising kids intentionally. I hinted a little bit that we're talking about teens, sort of, today. My guest today is Dr. Mandy Patterson. She is a fertility and hormone balancing expert. And so we're going to talk a little bit about hormones in our lives as the moms in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, wherever you are, and how our general health can support both our hormone health and our fertility, as well as how to open up that conversation with your teen and preteen, particularly girls, and how to help them future cast and care about their fertility when it's got to feel like so far in the distant future for them. And so, quite honestly, if you get nothing else from this podcast, you could stop right now and just make sure that you're talking with your teenage girls and boys about fertility, because the numbers are astounding and a little terrifying on our general loss of fertility as a culture. It is getting worse and worse and worse every year. We've got to turn this around. I want grandchildren. I also want a healthy world for my grandchildren and yours to be a part of. So let me introduce you to my guest today. Mandy Patterson, ND, is a functional naturopath and a fertility practitioner. She's the owner of a boutique fertility-focused wellness practice. She's a speaker and advocate for lasting, vibrant, optimal wellness. Mandy helps women conceive naturally and feel empowered on their fertility journey. But that's not all, because like I said, just trying to have a baby isn't what fertility is all about. It's really our general hormone health. So her mission is to empower women in their fertility journey and give them the exact tools and guidance they need to achieve the health and family of their dreams. Mandy believes that transformation is possible for every woman, and she strives to help women all over the world overcome fertility struggles, boost their overall wellness and health, and invite joy and happiness into their life. She is a mom of many. We're about the same age, Mandy and I, and so we've got these kind of young adults and teens that we are parenting. This conversation is going to be very relaxed. It's very conversational, and we're just going to talk a lot about parenting and what Mandy sees in her practice and some of the struggles that women, men, and teenagers out there are having right now with their hormone health. Dr. Mandy Patterson, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to talk to you because this is a really important subject.
Katie, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about fertility, but right off the bat, we got to say that this is not about having babies. This is about keeping your hormones and your general health as a woman in balance and in a good place so that you feel good for your life. And that also happens to, help fertility if and when that's a goal for you or your teens, now teens, later goals, right? Yeah. But let's start out with kind of your background. Like, where did you start out coming out of college, and what's your path to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially I trained as an occupational therapist. Early 2000s, if that gives you any indication of my age. Graduated in 2003 from St. Louis University, but always had a passion for health and wellness. Growing up, my grandfather had a spinal cord injury, and I watched what he went through. And so knew very early on that I wanted to go into medicine of some sort, but I chose occupational therapy because there was more flexibility to have a family, and that was a goal of mine. My mom had stayed at home with my family and brothers, and then same with my mother-in-law, so that was always a really important thing for us. But got married my senior year of college and ended up having my son, my first son, 3 months early. My husband and I hadn't planned to get pregnant, but we did. And I was actually on my clinicals working at a rehabilitation center doing pediatrics. And it was quite a scare. To be told when you're 22 that you're probably not going to make it and your son's probably not going to make it was a big blow. And by the grace of God, we made it through that. We have a really strong faith. And my son spent it was almost 5 months in the NICU. Yeah, it was long. And he had a lot of issues, complications, ended up with 2 bowel surgeries because of a bowel infection as a preemie. So that kind of was like the start when my eyes were open to health and wellness and what creates health. I always thought I was healthy. I grew up, I was an athlete. I played soccer, volleyball, softball. Even in college, I was an avid exerciser. But we were immersed in that, standard American way with diet and, obviously as we tend to push ourselves really hard. That's, the fabric of our culture. And I realized it really caught up with me and, could have been really bad. But yeah, that was kind of the start. And then my son kind of kept having health issues and we were not getting answers. So that's when I started digging in and understanding functional medicine back then. So
it's the story of so many holistic health and wellness practitioners is they start out with something in their own self or in their kids. And they're like, no one can solve this for me. So I guess I got to figure it out and go back to school, right? Yeah.
It's like you end up deciding, I've got to figure this out myself. And you dive in and start figuring out there's so many layers that make it so complex, right?
Mm-hmm. And, Mandy, it sounds like your body had no trouble, being fertile, and probably your age, the young age of 22 had something to do with that. Yeah. But I think what you're saying is that you're looking back at your diet and lifestyle and saying that did not create a body that could support life in its best, most healthy way.
That's so true that you say that, because even as a teenager, I had debilitating periods like that would keep me home. At that time of the month, I would literally be incapacitated and I wouldn't be able to play ball. And even in college, I remember there were a few times when I just had to stay in bed. And back then my physician was like, "Ooh, I wonder if you have PCOS or endometriosis." And so there was talk around that. But again, like as young girls, we're not taught body physiology. We're not taught what a normal cycle looks like. And we're just kind of told to suffer through it, take your Tylenol and ibuprofen and just get through it. And so we're not equipped with the knowledge to navigate those things, which is really challenging.
I agree. And I know so many women, and I'm picturing friends back in high school and college too, who had similar experiences where their periods were just debilitating and knocked them off their feet. And so we're kind of going to try to do a 2-part conversation today where we're going to talk about hormones in our 30s and 40s and 50s-ish. But we really are going to spend some time too talking about our teenage daughters and our preteen daughters and how we can help them look for signs of problems and red flags and best support their bodies moving forward, because the infertility rates are insane. They're insane in the young people. They're even worse in their 30s. First of all, what are we talking about as far as current expected infertility rates? And what do you think is at the root cause globally?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, really the statistics right now are 1 in 6 couples are going to struggle with infertility. But I will say this, just based upon my own practice and what I see with my partner, Dr. Jeannie Sheffley, we run positivityfertility.com. I think that the statistics are even more, maybe even 1 in 5 and 1 in 4. So depending upon what expert you consult and talk to, either way, it is, like you said, it is soaring. The infertility rates, the hormonal issues, and it's becoming an epidemic. I feel like even back when you and I were having kids, we weren't hearing as much of infertility, although my own unique experience has been, a couple of my sister-in-laws really were challenged with it, and had to do, assisted reproductive technology. But yeah, that's what we're looking at right now.
That's a huge number, really, when you think about 1 in 6 couples. And what's the reality? Because that's the couples who are trying and
Yeah.
who are reporting. There are so many couples who are maybe being married for 10 years before they even try, or there are lots of people who are not trying, or, people who aren't even married. They don't even know
Yeah.
that they might have their fertility shot. They're not even included in those numbers. But I remember being in childbearing age too, and just thinking, oh gosh, another friend we heard had a miscarriage,
Yeah.
or another friend who's struggling. And I started to feel like we were nearly the only people we knew who could just easily have babies. Like, I feel really fortunate that I had no miscarriages. And I think I'm in a tiny, tiny minority. And that's even, infertility is one thing. And then miscarriages are a whole other cross to bear.
Yeah, because even with myself, I had one miscarriage. I mean, I have 6 children, but did struggle with that. And I think we will dive into this and hit on some important points. But even for myself, my cycle and the challenges that I dealt with were a window into what my fertility was looking like. And so I think, and we can talk more about that, my own experience, but that's why I really just dug in and started trying to learn because, back then physicians told me, you probably aren't going to have any more kids based upon your genetics. And you're kind of like, as a woman, you're like, what does that mean? It makes you feel defective. It makes you feel like there's something wrong with you. I mean, there's this stigmatism associated with it, right? So for me, I actually had the knowledge and background from a research side of things to really like sort things out really quickly for myself. And then I went on to have 5 more healthy pregnancies after that, had full-term babies.
Which is amazing. So obviously your genes were not broken.
No.
And probably that's not the root cause of the rest of, the world experiencing this infertility. And I don't know if it's just developed nations or not, but what do you see as the global root cause? What's going on?
Yeah, so I really believe it is a confluence of factors. The challenge is like as a society, the chemicals and all of those things are very unregulated. You know this because you talk about this all the time on your podcast and your communities, but it's out of control. And like literally 50s on, we really started seeing way more endocrine disruptors in our environment. BPAs are a big one, they're endocrine blockers. And are really having, now we're seeing the downstream impact of everything that happened back then. And so like our mothers being exposed to those toxins and chemicals and things. Glyphosate's another big one, that it's on our foods, it's in the runoffs of our rivers and our streams, and that's a huge toxin. So I think it's that. I also believe, I'm very passionate about food, just like you. I'm a master gardener and culinary nutrition expert too. So I really dove into the science of food and, our food supply has changed. Most of us like are in that standard American diet where everything's prepackaged. And that's how we're not eating real food. And so there's chemicals in those things that really just impact the gut microbiome. Same with those toxins that we're talking about in our environment. And so, the microbiome is very, it's a delicate organ that like it is the seat of our immune system. So many of our hormones, our neurotransmitters are generated there. And so when you're kind of taking in those things and then living the standard American busy diet hamster wheel, just, stress and busy and don't have time to sit down and enjoy a meal, that really does impact our health. So going back to the 3 main things that I see all the time are stress, the standard American diet and foods, and then toxins are just really impacting us globally because we're seeing that in even other countries that have adopted more of a modern culture. We see that in Europe. We're seeing that in Australia. I actually lived in Australia, so I can speak to that as well, and living in a different country.
So it's not just an American problem, potentially a developed world problem, but we're sharing our toxins with the undeveloped parts of the world as well, unfortunately. And so, Mandy, when we think about fertility, Like that's one thing. Obviously, this is a parenting podcast. So most of our listeners, at least somewhat, have gotten this figured out.
Yeah.
However, like you said, your cycles were pointing to your fertility.
Yep.
Healthy fertility means kind of a healthy body, and the way we feel is really impacted whether we're trying to conceive or not. So, like, what advice would you have for women to just generally support their own hormone health, particularly in their 30s and 40s, where a lot of my audience is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think so many of us can get overwhelmed. Like, the internet is full of information. It's constant, if we're out there on Facebook, Instagram, and it's really hard to discern like what is the best path for me. And I want to like emphasize that everyone is unique. But we do know that there's certain tenets of health that can really like we can start to do those things and make a really big difference for our overall health. And so, like, the one thing is, and I know you're going to agree with me on this, is eat real food and eat organic when you can. Now, I know that it's so expensive to go to the grocery these days, especially when we have kids. It's a lot. But, starting with even environmental working group, they have the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and though they make suggestions around every year. If you're going to buy foods that are organic, what are those top foods that you need to buy, which is the Dirty Dozen. Whereas the Clean 15 are usually those that are not as heavily herbicided and pesticided and such. So, that's like some simple things. So getting on their website can be valuable. And I think like literally just focusing on real food, like, all the time, like, making sure our plate is full of at least half vegetables and, really healthy root vegetables, like those kinds of things. And then like kind of building our plate, whatever that looks like. So vegetables as the foundation, and fruits are great too. I think, I really recommend more around like lower glycemic fruits, especially for women that are struggling like in the 30s and their 40s with like blood sugar regulation. We know that certain types of fruits can really spike the blood sugars. So berries are great. They're full of phytonutrients, antioxidants, and fiber. And then like focusing on a really good quality protein, like, and I love to encourage people like get in your community, find out what resources you have, partner with the local farmer so you know where your food is coming from, what their practices are from a farming standpoint, because you really want to make sure that they're doing good and ethical farming practices. So you know how the animals are being treated. And so, and then on top of that is like adding in some healthy fats. So, that can look like, extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds, salmon, sardines, like those kinds of things. So kind of going more towards a Mediterranean style focused diet. That's been one of the most heavily studied diets out there, but we know that people get great results with it. And we can see that in their blood level markers, right? So, like lower triglycerides and better cholesterol levels, which is going to reduce, like heart disease. And then also, too, those healthy fats and like real focus on those phytonutrients and antioxidants are going to help women with their hormone health. So a lot of times we think when our hormones are kind of out of balance that it's the hormones, but I always tell people you've got to go upstream. So the hormones are the downstream impact of everything upstream. So you've got to really focus on that nutrition and diet and movement, and exercise is so key. So that's where I would definitely start with the diet.
And it's so simple. I mean, what you're saying is that supporting our fertility and our hormone health looks exactly the same as really good advice for just supporting our health and,
Yes.
and feeling good and taking care of ourselves. You, Dr. Patterson, you mentioned that blood sugar. And I feel like a lot of women walk around and say, oh, like I'm feeling a lot of fatigue, or I wish I could lose weight. But I don't hear a lot of people saying, I really struggle with blood sugar regulation. So what does that look like? What does it feel like if someone is struggling with blood sugar regulation?
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. I see this in my practice all the time with a lot of women. They literally wake up, they are grabbing their cup of coffee before they're heading out the door. They're not eating anything. And so what most people don't understand is how important it is, the practices that we do early in the day to set the stage for healthy hormones later in the day. And so, I like to tell people, from a fasting standpoint, it's really helpful to do 12 hours of fasting. So whatever time you eat dinner, and I'd say like by 6 o'clock at night. Now for us busy moms, that can be really hard. I have kids that are in sports and activities. So a lot of times, like, we don't even get home until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. But really focusing on moving up, when you eat your dinner, and then eating or not eating throughout the entire night. And then when you wake up in the morning, have a little something to jumpstart your metabolism. So the mistake that many make is we'll grab some caffeine. We're not eating anything with it, and it's spiking our cortisol really high. And then maybe not even eating until like mid-morning or at lunch. And then we can start to have that crash with our blood sugar levels because our body doesn't have anything to run on, like the fuel. So really focusing on, a fasting window that's at least 12 hours, and then getting up in the morning and having a really good quality protein. Protein really helps establish blood sugar levels in the morning and can really start to get our metabolism cranking. So, and some people do struggle with, like, they're just not hungry in the morning, but that's an indicator of what your metabolism is throughout the day. So you kind of have to train yourself, if that makes sense.
So it's back to the old, like, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It's not exactly what you're saying, but you're kind of reflecting that. Like, I think a lot of people hear about intermittent fasting or having a fasting window, and they're like, okay, great. I'll have my bedtime snack or my ice cream. That's me talking at 9 or 10 p.m. And then I'll just put off breakfast. But particularly for women, the fasting window at night is much more important. Jumpstarting the metabolism, whether you're hungry or not in the morning, is key.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting that right.
The thing is like, from a Western side of things, like, we don't really talk about like detoxification at night, but like sleep is so, so important to our overall health, our hormone health, our metabolic health. And so like our body needs time and rest from digestion. So that's like, you don't want to eat at like 9 o'clock at night because your body should be focusing on getting ready for bed instead of digestion. And what happens is if we're eating later in the night, our body's kind of missing out on those cleansing waves that really like clean our digestive tract out, really support our immune system and overall health. And so, and it's just kind of our culture, right? We're a snacking kind of culture. And kind of even bringing in genetics, some of us are more prone to that. Like, we're prone to be night owls. If you dig into clock genes, like some of us, and I have been that person where we get a lot done at night. And that's like how our brain's wired genetically, but it's not always best for our overall health.
You're talking right to me because I'm a big late night snacker and definitely a night owl. My dad is 86 and somewhat recently widowed. And so he's figuring out like how to take care of himself for the first time in his entire life.
Yes.
Which is interesting and a little terrifying to watch. But the man will have almost a half a carton of ice cream at midnight or 1 in the morning. I'm like, you should probably just go to bed. Like, you need more sleep. I'm getting lots of sleep because he sleeps until noon. I'm like, oh, this is not the way your life should work. But it's, it's definitely like deep in my genes to eat ice cream at night. So I got to work on that.
My grandma was always that one. She was super thin and she could literally she'd eat ice cream every night. And I've always struggled with my weight. And as a kid, she would be like, yes, you shouldn't do this or that. And I'm like, well, you're doing it yourself. So, but I think the challenge is just some of us are, can stay thin and do that. But there's a lot more of us that, if we do that, then like, we're going to have issues with weight gain and hormone issues and metabolism issues and all that.
Huge thank you to our podcast sponsor today, Pact. That's PACT. And Pact makes some of the most just simple, beautiful, long-lasting, organic clothing for both kids and adults. My daughter and I both love shopping at Pact. I particularly enjoy their leggings, and she likes that their stuff comes in solid colors with no words on it, so she can just be plain and simple and not stand out. Of course, I also love that it's all organic material because if you're going to have stuff touching your body all day long, it might as well not have toxins riding along. You can get 15% off your first order with the coupon code KitchenStewardship15. Just go to kidscookrealfood.com/pact, PACT, and use the coupon code KitchenStewardship15. Do enjoy looking around at Pact, where they have a wide variety of clothing, all the way from underwear to cute dresses. Well, and the optics aren't everything, right? When we think about thinness or the number on the scale, there can be a lot of messed up stuff going on in people's hormones and metabolic health, even if they look thin on the outside, right?
You're exactly right. I mean, each one of us is unique, and we can turn genes on and off by our diet and our lifestyle options that we choose. And so, yeah, I mean, you can be skinny, but metabolically unhealthy and at higher risk for cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and like all those things. Infertility is another one, right?
Right. So, like, whether our body is immediately showing signs and symptoms of ill health when we eat too much, too late, too processed, whatever, like, we have to look at the research and say, this is so, so, so important. Yeah. Speaking of, I read last week a statistic that I mean, I don't know if this is right. I can't even remember where I read it, but I read that 25% of women may be struggling with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Before we hit record, you said it might be 10%. The thing is, a lot of women, even if it's 1 in 10, a lot of women are having a significant disease of hormone imbalance, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Can you talk about that a little bit, and particularly signs and symptoms that people might want to watch for in themselves or their loved ones or their kids?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, it is becoming more of an epidemic with PCOS. I'm seeing younger and younger people in my practice that are challenged with these things. And just some things to look for from a PCOS standpoint could be acne and oily skin. It could be like hair loss is another big one. Really painful periods. Also just delayed periods where maybe you're not cycling I would say around 30 days. Now, not everybody is 30 days. Like some people are 35 days and beyond. But like if your periods are irregular, that's something to look for. And one marker is if you were to go in and get screened by your physician would be cysts on the ovaries. And that is like one of the markers that, defines PCOS, but definitely more of those androgenic qualities, like testosterone wise, where you see hair in places that you shouldn't. So like on your chin or like on your like lip, and struggle with that. So that's PCOS is driven more of an androgen testosterone imbalance with estrogen. So you can really kind of see those markers show up like if you were to run blood work. So yeah, there's a lot of different defining factors. And so like, if you do feel like or your daughter's struggling with that, to get them screened, because there are certain things that really need to happen to balance those hormones from a lifestyle and diet standpoint.
It sounds really important. And PCOS, correct me if I'm wrong, but that can really cause significant infertility issues, right?
It can. Yes. And it really is. I mean, I see so many women that, some of the big things that I see in my practice with women that are struggling with infertility, it's autoimmunity and thyroid issues. PCOS is another big one. And interestingly enough, a lot of women that have PCOS challenges also have thyroid challenges. So you can really see imbalances in the thyroid. And again, remembering that all of our organ systems and body systems communicate with one another. And so when we see a person that has an autoimmune disease, they're much more likely to have another autoimmune disease or imbalances with their hormones. So that's, a piece of the puzzle as well.
It makes a lot of sense. What kind of testing do you do to see some of these hormone imbalances? And is this mostly in the holistic functional medicine world, or would a typical OBGYN assess stuff like this?
From a lab standpoint, like you can see a lot of imbalances. Like I was just looking at a report earlier with suspected PCOS, and you can see challenges with cholesterol and triglycerides. Again, like I said, you can see imbalances with the thyroid where they're more hypothyroid. So a full thyroid panel can give you a lot of information. Those are probably the biggest ones where you can kind of start to dig in and start to connect the pieces. Again, I feel like from a functional naturopathic side of things, it really is the person's lived experience. So really just listening to them and hearing them speak and how it's impacting their life, then you can kind of use all the other data to kind of get a picture.
So some of these factors we've been talking about that cause infertility, stress, food, toxins, are these affecting hormones and lifestyle, or I guess health, in kids and teens? And how does that play into maybe some of our parenting choices?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my own daughters was having struggles around the hormone side of things, but she is not generally compliant. She doesn't love to like do what we say. But she's a kid growing up in 2024, right? Where on every corner there's a gas station where you can drop in and get sugary drinks and Gatorade and like all of those things. And then like some of us, based upon our unique genetics, we need higher amounts of nutrients because our food supply is so depleted. So we can kind of see that really drive things where, some of us do need extra supplementation if we're not able to get it through food. And then, a factor when you kind of even go back to stress, like we really deplete our nutrients very quickly when we're in a stressed out state. So we see lots of imbalances with the macro minerals like magnesium, calcium, sodium, phosphorus. Those can become out of whack. And then, what's interestingly enough is I was actually just looking at data on kids that have cavities. And I was looking at this because this is a recurring theme in my household where my kids have really struggled with cavities. And generally, we eat a very healthy diet. Now they can drive now, so they can also go get their things. But lower vitamin D status is also correlates with cavities and so oral health. So, and what we do know is like our kids, a lot of them are spending a lot of times indoors. They're not getting out and getting sunshine, which is, a vitamin in and of itself, right? Vitamin D is a hormone, but it regulates so many different things from an immune side of things, from a hormonal side of things. So that's, interesting. And, living in Australia, living abroad with our family, one thing that Australians really prioritized was 2 to 3 times in the week, they would actually have outdoor activities where schools would, have games against one another. So the kids were more active and you could just see they were metabolically healthier. They were leaner and because they were not only getting movement, but they were getting like really good vitamin D.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. I'm sure that it's easier to prevent infertility than to fix it when we think about, my babies, my little girl, and I have a teenage girl. So if you could work with some of the clients you have now who are struggling in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, back when they were teenagers, like what would be some of the biggest pieces of advice you would give them about those teenage years?
Yeah, you and I both, I feel like we're educators, and so body literacy is so important. And so the programs that I even run in my own practice are educational in nature, teaching you about your body physiology, what your cycle, menstrual cycle as a female is a vital sign. It's been called the fifth and the sixth vital signs, depending on, who you pay attention to and what expert. But it's a vital sign. And so being checked in and tuned into our cycles are so important. And I think having knowledge around that if we have difficult, painful periods, that is not normal. Like we need to figure out and go in with somewhat of a magnifying glass to say, okay, so what do our foundations look like? What does our diet look like? What does our stress load look like? What does our movement look like? And really checking in. And, I think a real challenge with this generation, our kids' generation, is like my 16-year-old just turned 16. So she was born in 2008. They have grown up with cell phones. That's all they know. And like we're talking Apple iPhones, right? And I always remember this because when I went in to have her in September of 2008, my husband bought me my first Apple iPhone. So, that is something these kids, that's all they know. And I really think it is a deterrent to health. They're on their screens very late at night. So when we talk about cortisol and melatonin imbalances, these kids are on their screens till really late with that light that really can impact the pineal gland and our body's ability to rest and digest and detox. So, those things are really important. And so, from an overall hormonal and body literacy standpoint, setting boundaries around, well, you know what, probably shouldn't be on your phone past 7, 8 o'clock at night. Or, if you have to be on your computer, using a blue light blocker glasses so your body's not being exposed to that bright light that really disrupts those circadian rhythms. I would say, really just doing an inventory on, what does your diet look like? What's it look like 80% of the time? Which, I'm all for balance. And like if you're going to a birthday party, it's okay to have a cupcake or, have some ice cream every now and then, but probably not every night, right?
Probably not. Probably not, says Katie to herself. And of course we want what's best for our kids. Like when I hear you talking about your 16-year-old, I also have a, 2008 born girl. So it's so funny. We have the exact same age. And my heart just feels at the same time expansive with love for her and a little bit constricted with worry because we want what's best for our kids. Yeah. But as you mentioned, teens don't always want what's best for them, and they don't always want what we think is best for them. Do you have any strategies on fertility in particular, like how to talk to teens and preteens about fertility being important? Because it's got to feel so distant to them.
It's very I think it's challenging, right? I have 3 girls. And so I try not to hover as a mom. It's hard when you're a naturopath and functional medicine practitioner to not just like want to go in and fix everything for them. But what I've learned more than anything is last night I was sitting with her and she struggled with her weight. She did travel soccer for years. And then a couple years ago, just decided she didn't want to keep doing it. And I was supportive of that because her heart wasn't into it. But we were talking and she's going to get ready to start swimming this year. And she was talking about her weight and like she's really made an effort the last 2 or 3 months to start walking outside. And I told her, I'm like, you have to start somewhere small. And I think kids and adults alike, like if we go into this, like you've got to do this, this, and this, it's overwhelming and we just shut down. So I think just saying like, one simple change at a time. And that might look like instead of going to bed at 11 or 11:30 p.m. and being on our screens until 10 p.m., adjusting that and being like, okay, I'm going to get in bed by 10:30 tonight. And I'm going to really make an effort not to be on my phone tonight. And just doing that for a while. And, it takes roughly 21 days to set new habits and just giving yourself grace over it. So what I've learned with my kids is, I'm sure you've learned this too, they don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be told what to do as adults either. So, just reinforcing those positive things that they're doing, I think goes a really long distance. And then they're more apt to come to us and say, I've got this problem. What do you think about this? And so like even my girls, they've been struggling with these cavities. So I've been talking to them like, okay, let's maybe reduce some of the sugar that you're eating and maybe try a different type of toothpaste that's going to be better for cavities. And, I get their buy-in that way. So it's taken me a long time to figure that out as a mom, but just being open, being supportive, and just supporting them on their journey.
So when it comes to fertility, we're going to look for those ins, look for things that are already annoying the girl. I mean, you mentioned acne as a potential sign of PCOS or can go hand in hand. So man, if you've got a girl who's like, oh, I hate my skin, I hate my face. Now we've got an in. We can say, well, I've learned some things and this also might impact your fertility. Can we talk about your cycles? I love that phrase that you've used, Mandy, of body literacy. And I wonder specifically with cycles and our girls, I want to say women, no, our teenage girls, they're just little still. What kind of conversations do you have to teach body literacy and to make that an open forum that your girls feel like they can come to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Acne is one of those things that's hard because it's something that everybody can see, right? And for many of them, they have body image issues. And that was my 18-year-old. She struggled with a lot of acne and she ended up with some scarring on her face. But, her and I would have lots of conversations. And I'd be like, she was a swimmer and was a tremendous athlete with swimming. But we would sit and talk about certain things. And I would be like, maybe going to bed a little bit earlier might like really help you. And so I would drop little hints over the years with her. And now she's away at college. But what was really interesting is this last year I saw shifts with her and she started realizing because she was overweight, struggled with weight, that she didn't want to be that way anymore. And when she started making lifestyle changes, her acne improved. And so it was just kind of me dropping those seeds because I feel like as moms, we're kind of like farmers. We're planting seeds left and right. We don't know where it's going to drop or like how it's going to fall, but we're kind of like preparing for that harvest. And, I think that those little things can really make an impact. And even like with her cycles improved because she was the one that was kind of going down that path of more PCOS dynamics and really challenged by that. And then like even our boys, when we talk about that, because we're talking a lot about our girls, but our boys, like my son, he's 22, and boys wear their phones in their pockets. So they're kind of microwaving their goods. Like we don't want that as moms. Like, so like even my son, and he's open to listening to me, but I was like, yeah, can you like not put your phone in your pocket? Because I really want grandchildren one day. And so just having these open conversations, I think goes the distance for us feeling like, we have to present a dissertation to them. That doesn't work. But just collaborating with them and being open and loving them where they're at.
That's a great point about the phones. I mean, I use that line even with my younger boys and their tablets. Are you in airplane mode if you can be? I want grandchildren. Even the awareness for preteens and teens that a phone or a tablet or something on Wi-Fi, near their body could potentially affect their fertility. That's a big conversation starter potentially someday. And it's more than, your average high school kid should know.
Well, and another one that comes up for me is plastic water bottles. Like they are all over. And when we talk about those BPAs, drinking those, especially for our women that are, more prone to have like PCOS, just getting rid of the plastic water bottles. So my daughter that just went away to college, I actually bought her a couple water bottles that have filters with them and just encouraged her, hey, like this is so much better choice than like drinking from plastic water bottles. And she was open. So, and actually like the Lark water bottles, it's LARQ, where they're self-filtering. So like when they're away, you don't have to worry about a big like Berkey water filter or like, one of those water filters that are great, but not really practical for our kids.
I know. Can you see a Berkey in a dorm room? That would be the most hilarious and impractical thing.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's so great. Well, this has been fascinating. Dr. Mandy Patterson, we're going to make sure we share links to everywhere that people can find you. Do you have like a last practical tip? If people do just kind of one action step today, what would it be?
Yeah, I think more than anything, what we're most challenged with is just stress, and just high performance all the time, like never having any downtime. And so what I've even learned myself, not only as a professional, but as a mom, a busy mom that's always on the go with kids and running them from practices and games and activities, is to really just open up time in your schedule for just downtime, self-care time. And every day, even for myself, I make sure like 30 days of movement. I don't care what that looks like, if that's going to the gym or if that's outside, getting sunshine on our bodies like early in the day can make a really big difference for our sleep and our, that cortisol rhythm. When we talk about, higher cortisol can be detrimental to overall hormone health. So that's what I would say is just practically like, what's something really simple that you can do that just feels good to you? It might be an Epsom salt bath, reading a good book.
Yeah. And building that into your routine,
Yes.
right? Like we bike my youngest to school And so that's so great. We get to just 10 minutes of movement and sunshine, and we can't skip it. We got to get them to school,
Yeah.
right? So that's a life hack for sure for us to make sure we get a little bit of that movement and breathing time and downtime. It's lovely. All right. Well, thank you so very, very much, Dr. Mandy Patterson. We'll connect people with you everywhere we share this interview.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I hope your brain feels fed and your heart feels full and that you feel connected, knowing that there are other parents on this journey with you. We're just trying to raise healthy, independent adults. And the next time you think, man, there is no handbook for this job. Now there is the Healthy Parenting Handbook. Look up the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please leave a review, my friends, as that helps other parents who need this information to find us. And of course, subscribe. That's a huge help. You can also look for our shorts as a reel on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook, or subscribe to the Healthy Parenting Handbook Shorts channel on YouTube. You'll get those bite-sized portions of healthy parenting advice.